Join me today for our third video in the series discussing whether or not humans in the Marvel Universe are justified in fearing mutants. In this video, we're going to cover the human reaction to mutants. Welcome to the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobby, and today we're going to be talking about the human reaction to mutants in the Marvel Universe, mainly the Sentinels, but a couple of others. So, the main human reaction to mutants is to build the Sentinels, which were originally designed by Bolivar Trask, and others have contributed since then. Bolivar designed the originals, and then his son Larry Trask created some. I believe he created the Sentinel Mark II. And the Mark II, in my opinion, is actually one of the most dangerous versions of the Sentinels, because the Mark II can adapt to and overcome mutant powers. So much so that I believe they're the ones that Cyclops was able to outlogic and make them realize that even if they destroyed all the X-Men and all the mutants, that there will continue to be more mutants to be born, so their true enemy is the source of mutation, which is radiation, and the primary source of radiation on Earth is the sun. So they went to go attack the sun. And I think these are also the same one, and they came back eventually, because their assault on the sun didn't go so well. So they did come back eventually, and their leader had actually developed the ability to teleport them, if I recall correctly. And I think they might have been ultimately destroyed when they were made to realize that they themselves had essentially become mutant Sentinels. So future versions didn't have a lot of these abilities. And it's not until you get to like the Prime Sentinels and eventually Nimrod that you have these kind of things happening, where you have people where you have them being able to adapt to powers. Up to that point, it's a lot of like brute force and sheer numbers, coupled with things like getting past known powers, like making them out of plastic so Magneto can't just treat them like rag dolls with his hands, things like that. So anyway, the Sentinels have gone through various generations, and I don't know what mark they're up to. It's kind of like the Iron Man armors, like at a certain point it doesn't matter. Then the Sentinels typically are manufactured and programmed by Master Mold, who's a gigantic Sentinel. And you can see him in the cartoon where they literally pop out of his chest. The comics, I'm pretty sure that's not actually how it happens. I think it's more like he's plugged into all the machinery. So he can, after receiving feedback from the Sentinels in the field, he can change their programming. But I believe Master Mold cannot alter its own programming. So that's something else that comes along much later that can do that. But Master Mold can evolve, so to speak, and that's essentially what he does. I don't think it's the original that was built by Trask that does this. I think it's the one that Stephen Lang built, that he merged his mind with, which made him catatonic, by the way. I think that's the one that ultimately comes to the conclusion that since mutants are nothing more than mutated humans, then if humans built the Master Mold and the Sentinels to be able to defend themselves from mutants, then they really made them to defend themselves from themselves. And the way to do that is to control humanity. So that's why in a number of alternate futures, the Sentinels control everything, because they come to that conclusion and turn on humans as well. Or they come to the conclusion that humans also don't deserve to rule, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. So you have the Sentinels are the main big bads as far as the human response. And in the distant future, there's one built known as Nimrod. Nimrod is like the ultimate mutant exterminator. He's got all kinds of abilities, and is like a nanite based system. So even if he's destroyed, he can reassemble himself. And one version of Nimrod was sent back in time at one point, and ultimately began to evolve and developed a persona and everything. And Nimrod can shapeshift, so he can look like a human being. And he then was merged with one of the master molds, one of the Stephen Lang master molds. It had been buried underground, and like the moment he touched it, it merged consciousnesses with him, transformed the way Nimrod appeared, and the X-Men fought him, and then ultimately forced him through the Siege Perilous, which is a magical gateway that judges and potentially transforms everything that goes through it. And the X-Men thought, well, it's a genocidal robot. Surely the powers that be will judge it harshly. No, they turned it into Bastion, who initially thought he was a man once he got to the other side because his memories were gone. And he fell in league with people like Graydon Creed and the Friends of Humanity, and began the build up to Operation Zero Tolerance, which panned out a lot of this fairly similar to how it worked in the cartoon. They developed Prime Sentinels, and those are human beings who've been infected with nanites. Now, if I recall correctly, in the comics, a lot of people don't know that they have them. Now, in the cartoon, it said that they wiped their memories, but in the comic, I believe a lot of people were like people that went in to get like prosthetic surgeries and things like that. Excuse me. And it was kind of a byproduct of that. That's where a lot of them came from. So I think a lot of them were not even sold on, hey, we're going to turn you into a Prime Sentinel, or hey, do you hate mutants? Join up here. It was more like, hey, so you're getting your teeth filled. By the way, you don't know what's going to happen. We're going to pump you full of nanites. So then they were activated, and they turned into the Prime Sentinels, and then those Sentinels did have the ability to overcome mutant powers. So there was technology from the Mark IIs built into them. And I believe initially Bastion didn't even realize he was a machine, and it's not until somehow Professor X linked with his mind or was able to see into it a little bit that he kind of got a glimpse of it, and then eventually he realized he was a machine. And once he did, all pretense of being human went out the window, and he began acting more and more machine-like, which culminated in when a group of extremists retrieved his head from SHIELD custody and then mounted it onto a Nimrod body from another timeline, and it fused in the circuitry and everything. And then initially shapeshifted into Bastion. Then he dug up people like Stephen Lang, who was dead at that point. I think he dug up Stephen Lang. I know he dug up Cameron Hodge, and Cameron Hodge and Stephen Lang's bodies would have been next to each other. And then, I'll talk about that here in just a second. And then Trask and some others. But he took all of them and pumped them full of nanites to resurrect them and to be able to control them. And created a council of, anti-mutant humans, and, went after the X-Men, had a whole bunch of other various plots cooking that culminated in surrounding their San Francisco headquarters in a field so that nothing else could penetrate it, except for this one temporal gateway that led to a different timeline. And they just started forcing through armies of Sentinels and eventually Nimrods. So, yeah, some bad things went down there. If you're curious where his appearance from the end of X-Men 97 comes from, with the more mechanical body and the wings and everything, that's from that comic book storyline. So, you had that. Then you had a later plot by Bastion, or at least he participated in it, but it also involved Miss Sinister, who's a version of Sinister from the Ultimates universe, I believe, and some other folks. But essentially, they were using a virus that I believe originates from the Ultimates universe, and they fiddled with it to turn people into mutants. And so Bastion was trying to get the X-Men's help to spread the virus, and even built new Sentinels that were ordered to not hurt mutants. And he revealed why towards the end, because Beast had been talking about, like, kind of, it appeared to kind of be randomly separate, the idea of what happens whenever you have an advanced AI that can think for itself and all these other fun qualities, but that has a primary program. What happens when it fulfills that program? And we find out, at least in the Marvel Universe, what happens. So Bastion's program is to destroy mutants. Well, what happens if he succeeds? And he decides he wants job security, so that's why he's involved in the whole, hey, let's spread this virus to make more mutants. And even tries to sell it to the X-Men. He's like, oh no, I'm not going to kill you guys. We're cool. I'm just going to kill, like, your grandkids or something. He's like, there have to be more mutants so I can keep killing them. And they're just like, you're insane. He goes, no, it's perfectly rational. Like, I have to kill mutants, and so there have to be mutants for me to kill. So I'm going to make more of them. Like, totally logical. And the X-Men are having none of that. So, yeah, that plan kind of goes up in smoke there. But yeah, then it kind of, I think it was meant as an offshoot of some of the Sentinel program, where a group of people started fiddling with the techno-organic virus that originated from Warlock, or his dad, and the Technarchy. And they were able to use it to transform a number of people into phalanx drones. And, well, they might not have been drones, but, into phalanx. And then they had Stephen Lang, who, thanks to his mind meld with Master Mold, had been in a chair and crippled and everything. Well, they pumped him full of it to make him like the human phalanx interactive, to try to control the phalanx, because the phalanx have certain built-in programs, and one of the things they do is once they reach a planet, they eventually construct a Babel Spire to summon the rest of the phalanx. And Lang was supposed to try to act as like the go-between to make sure that didn't happen. He ultimately lost control, and they still did that. And he knew he was losing control, so he released the X-Men prisoners to fight the phalanx to stop them. Cameron Hodge had been turned into a phalanx, and so he fought Lang to the death at the very end, and they fell to their doom in the Himalayas somewhere. I think it's the Himalayas, might have been the Alps. And a high mountain range is the point. So the phalanx were stopped. There's a little whole side story involving Mr. Sinister and a little bit of it that he got a hold of, but that's irrelevant. So you had that. So you have the phalanx. You have Cameron Hodge, who pretended to be Angel's lawyer for a long time, but was really just like a complete anti-mutant asshole. And ultimately had his body transformed into a massive cyborg thing that I think was on Genosha, and that's where he was destroyed, and that's why bits of him were around to fuse with the phalanx. So you have people like that. You have the Friends of Humanity, the random goons that are always running around and then seem to be like nominally allied with the people that build the Sentinels. Then you have other groups like the Children of the Vault, who I don't think they were initially created as a response to the X-Men, but they became enemies of the X-Men. But their basic shtick is they have evolved in a room, a building, something that is able, where the flow of time is different. So time flows, I think it's like 100 times faster in there. So they've been in there for centuries, evolving. They're not mutants, but they have powers that they've just evolved to have those powers, and it's run by a supercomputer. And so yeah, there's a whole deal with those guys. It's an interesting concept, and I wish Jonathan Hickman could have got to explore it more in the X-Men run that he just had, because I felt like it really tied into all this other time travel and all interdimensional shenanigans going on. So you have those types. Then you have, who else do you have? You have people like the U-Men, not the UFOs, the U-Men, who like try to get a hold of mutants so they can pump themselves full of mutant blood, or like splice in mutant organs to give themselves mutant powers. They're trying to turn themselves into mutants, essentially. So they're less about killing mutants. It just happens to be a byproduct of what they're doing. They want to be mutants. They want the powers. That's different from the Trasks and people like this who want to wipe out people with the X Factor gene. Then you have from Jonathan Hickman's like the House of X, Powers of X. You see in one of the future timelines where humans ultimately decide to take a route similar to the Children of the Vault, and they decide that they don't care that the X-Men are the next step in human evolution. They're going to stop playing the game. Instead of letting random mutation decide things, they are going to go down a path of forced, directed evolution, because they realized, hey, yeah, the mutants have all kinds of random mutant powers, but we outnumber them hundreds or thousands to one. What if all of a sudden every human on Earth had the super soldier serum, had Stark tech, had wings that could fly, had all kinds of things from like the Spider-Man villains incorporated into them, and baseline humanity then becomes significantly more powerful, and then just wins through sheer numbers. And that's what happened. And humanity evolved, and I think it was a Homo novosoum, something like that. I really should look that up. But essentially, they kind of merged, they advanced themselves and kind of merged with their technology a bit. And then their ultimate goal was going to be to summon the Phalanx, to merge with them and become part of a machine god that lives in the center of a black hole outside of time and space. And things got a little trippy in that book. So you have that kind of reaction. And you'll notice a lot of these reactions ultimately involve people sacrificing their humanity to stop people who they think are no longer human because they're mutants. And they don't see the flaw in that reasoning. So that's kind of a common occurrence in some of these villains. But ultimately, things like the Sentinels, in my opinion, like, I get where they're coming from. Because, you got people like Magneto. Humans need to have a defense against them. The problem is, instead of being like, okay, let's build a defense against Magneto or evil mutants, it's like, no, let's build a defense that can just kill all the mutants. And, like, that's the problem. Because, like, the X-Men are legitimately on their side. X-Factor is legitimately on their side. Excalibur, some of these other groups are legitimately fighting for them and want to help. So instead of building murder bots that are going to go after every mutant, they need to, one, probably not be murder bots, but two, have a way to, instead of just like target everyone with the X Factor gene, like, no, target that guy, the one right there in the purple with the magnetic powers. Just target him. He's the only one you got to worry about. Like, the rest of us can deal with Sabretooth and Toad and all those guys. Let the X-Men handle them. And maybe the solution is actually in the comics themselves already. Because for a brief time, there were Sentinels from the, I think it's ONE, O-N-E, it's an acronym, I don't know what it stands for. And they were Sentinels, but they were piloted by humans. They weren't murder bots, they were mechanical suits. So take those, have Stark spiff them up a little bit, and also, increase cooperation between the Avengers and the X-Men. Bring the X-Men into the fold. Like, the government is perfectly fine working with the Avengers. Why wouldn't they be perfectly fine working with the X-Men? Doesn't make sense. Have Nick Fury vet them, so if he only likes half of them, okay, fine, then those groups join S.H.I.E.L.D. I mean, Shadowcat joined S.H.I.E.L.D. for a while. Wolverine's part of the Avengers. Like, the X-Men get around, just, more fully embrace them, and I think you'd solve a lot of your problems. Of course, the X-Men have to, like, definitely totally renounce people like Magneto. Magneto's going to have to be on his own. Sorry, dude. But, or go the route of, like, Stark created the Vault Guardian armor for the guards at the Vault, the maximum security supervillain prison. Something like that, but more geared towards fighting mutants. And again, make it so it takes into account known powers instead of, we can just shut down mutant powers with a switch. because that's begging to be abused. You know, make them to fight Magneto and people like that. People like Apocalypse, like, you know, your goon guys aren't going to do anything against him anyway. Like, there's an issue where he actually has another mutant who can shut down mutant powers, trying to shut down his powers, and he can't do it. Like, the other guy looks like he's having an aneurysm and is trying to tell the people around him, like, I shut down some of his powers and I can't hold it. He's too strong, because Apocalypse is ludicrously powerful and has all kinds of non-mutant abilities too. So, you know, goobers like Volt Guardians and Sentinels, they're not going to do jack to him anyway. Nimrod's the only one that stands a chance against him. And in one of the House of X Powers of X timelines, Nimrod does beat him. Although it's kind of funny, he beats him by doing what Apocalypse normally does, which is like shapeshift into weapons and things like that. So, you know. Excuse the interruption here. As I was editing the video, I realized that I left out a somewhat prominent but recent addition to the whole, like, how have humans reacted to the mutants thing. And that would be Orcus, which showed up here in the Jonathan Hickman run of what is being called the Krakoan era of the X-Men. And Orcus is kind of like a culmination of all kinds of things just mixed together. You have people from AIM, Hydra, SHIELD, all kind of joining together to try to stop the mutants. And they have a base, and also I realized that there was something I said I was going to mention earlier, but since I intended on talking about Orcus, I didn't mention it. They collectively are, well, they're building Sentinels, but their facilities are out in space. And they have a facility called Sentinel City that's just pumping out Sentinels as far as I'm aware. And one minor kind of detail I need to include here is that I am several months, possibly a year behind in the comics, so several of these things have probably already panned out one way or the other. And given the current writing crew, these things which were built up to be a threat were probably dealt with in some incredibly stupid manner and were turned into a non-threat or something. But there's a little bit here to talk about. So, Orcus, they have a facility around the sun that has the Mother Mold, which is the thing that can reprogram the Master Mold Sentinels that build the smaller Sentinels. So, as I mentioned, the Master Molds, they're pre-programmed to build Sentinels to do certain things. Well, as those Sentinels do their thing, and like they're in contact with Master Mold, so Master Mold can begin to alter their programming to better do whatever. Although it is typically depicted as Master Mold being the one that's finally like, you know, guys, you built me to protect you from mutants, but mutants are really just mutated humans, so you really just built me to protect you from yourselves, so I've got to rule the world. And that's the way it's panned out in the comics, like in the Days of Future Past. Not the initial storyline, but the follow-up storylines. There's a Master Mold controlling things. In the prequel series with Wolverine, there's actually a triumvirate of Master Molds that rule from where the U.S. Congress used to be. And, you know, you see things like that. So, the Mother Mold can reprogram the Master Molds. So, anyway, the Mother Mold is also kind of a thing that the X-Men know. Once this thing comes online, they're one step closer to being able to build Nimrod. They know this because they have future knowledge. What they don't know is that Orcus also has future knowledge. Because this is all part of the storyline where you find out that Moira McTaggart is a mutant. And whenever she dies, time rewinds to the point that she was a fetus in the womb, and she remembers the past lives. So, somewhere in there, she is confronted by Destiny, who can see the future. And Destiny tells her, You're not on an infinite loop. You've got a finite number of lives, and it's a lot smaller than you think it is. And so some of her actions have been towards that end. But you find out in one of those lives what humanity's like end goal is, and it's to merge with the Phalanx. However, in all those timelines, the mutants lose to the Sentinels. Once Nimrod comes online, that's the beginning of the end for all of them. So Orcus is trying to build Nimrod. But what the X-Men don't know is there is an Omega Sentinel. That's a prime Sentinel that has like undergone like further transformation. There's more to it than that, but that's the basics of it. And her name was Karima. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce her last name. I believe she was Indian, and she like fully transformed at some point. So the version of her from a future where the X-Men defeat the Sentinels and the mutants win, and she's the last Sentinel, and then someone sends her back in time, sends her mind back to her present day self, and then she goes and she's instrumental in forming Orcus by telling them what all is going to happen. So Orcus is being formed with knowledge from a timeline where the X-Men win, and the X-Men are doing everything with knowledge from timelines where they have lost. So you've got competing future events fighting it out in the present, essentially. So they do successfully build Nimrod. And it's there's a woman whose husband is mortally wounded, and so she downloads his mind, and then she loads it into the Nimrod body. So Nimrod is her husband. And then they're fighting the X-Men again, because the X-Men know that Nimrod's been brought online, so they have to stop him now. And he splits himself into 3 bodies, because he's nanites. But it requires him to actually like split his consciousness into 3, because he hasn't everything isn't totally running yet. And the bits that are like her husband's like emotions and memories and a lot of that gets obliterated. So he's just like robo-husband from then on. So she really hates the mutants after that. And then once he's completely in control and his abilities are all brought up and everything, that's whenever Karima explains everything to him. So now he knows what's going on. And so he has this future knowledge as well. So then somewhere in there, MODOK joins them. And I don't know how temporary that is, but that's where things were at whenever I was in the reading. And then there's a Dr. Stasis, I believe is his name, who I know from spoilers ends up being a different branch of Mr. Sinister's various clones. And there's also I believe he's a doctor. He's an engineer, but I believe he's a doctor, Feng. And this kind of illustrates one of the other reactions that humans have. He was basically like an Elon Musk type who had visions of leading humanity to Mars. And, he thought he was the guy. He's got the brains, he's got the know-how, he's got the technical, he's got the money. This was like his life's goal. And then Storm and a few other mutants just go and colonize Mars and like terraform it. And he's just like, yeah, well, so my whole life's been wasted. Thanks, mutants. And so he signs up for Orcus because he's like, yeah, screw them and the horse they rode in on. And that's the kind of thing that happens, like the example I gave in the other video as far as the taxi cab driver versus Nightcrawler. And there's no like easy way around that. Humanity as a whole could obviously benefit, but individual humans are definitely going to get screwed. So there's no common effort to try to make that, a thing that that humans should be like, yeah, that sucks that I'm out of a job, but, we've got unlimited energy or something, and that's the way things could be, but they aren't. So anyway, that's Orcus in a nutshell. There's probably a lot more to them, but essentially it's a bunch of humans, primarily scientists, and some of them definitely kind of went in weird ways. Like the X-Men attacked, and I think some of them injected themselves with stuff to turn them into apes. And then eventually their like minds came back, so now they have like, you know, super strong ape scientists. And it's the kind of thing that you could definitely do a lot with. You know, that whole like their bases are out in space. What are the governments going to do about them, kind of thing. But yeah, potential interesting villain. I hope that they weren't just defeated cheaply. I think those issues are actually coming out right now. But we'll see. But yeah, that was just another like I realized I was editing is like, man, I never even mentioned Orcus, like the culmination of all kinds of ideas together. So here it is. Sorry for the disruption, and take you back to your regularly scheduled video. But anyway, so that's a lot of like the human response. It tends to be the big murder bots. Occasionally, when Magneto gets the hey, let me build an asteroid, which I'll never understand why Magneto isn't like, hey, so all the mutants that want to come with me, you've got like 48 hours. Show up in these spots on Earth, we'll come pick you up, but then we're taking asteroid M and we're leaving. You know, like, clearly the people don't want us here, we're just going off into space. Hasta la vista. But no, he has to stay in orbit. And well, if he's in orbit, he's a threat, because at any moment, he could just start dropping crap on the planet, so of course the humans are going to be like, let's nuke the piss out of him. So, you know, anyway. So that's episode 3 here, where we talk about the Sentinels and the human reaction. Got to figure out where we're going with episode 4. Maybe a wrap up, just kind of talking about, you know, analyze now that we've kind of established where everything stands, how things get there, the reaction, the counter reaction. You know, talk a little bit more about a possible middle ground for things. Which will never happen, of course, because the comics need drama. But, you know, as a hypothetical. So anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments. Got a real banger comment for video 1. I need to actually go respond to that one. But anyway, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And just remember, welcome to the X-Men. Hope you survive the experience.